All right, guys, straight up, athletes are torque monsters, right? They're creating massive amounts of force in very short amounts of time. It doesn't take long, as you can tell, for a sprinter to quickly cross that 100-meter finish line or that vertical jump to be over. It's in a blink of an eye. And sometimes you're left like, yo, that's crazy. But from all those crazy moments that we see, we also see a ton of injuries. Sprinters pulling hamstrings, weightlifters getting crushed under a weight, injuring themselves as well. I mean, less so in those, but in sports and stuff, you always see it, right? ACL tear, all these injuries, right? Because of this, we needed to come up with exercises that can help strengthen muscles that result in lower injury rates. What are those muscles? We're about to find out. In today's topic, we are talking about one of my favorite exercises that you can do for injury prevention in athletics and in the regular population, but especially for the lower back. And this is super important for anybody who's doing things on both legs, like jumping or weightlifting. So anything that's explosive in nature using two legs. This also will carry over to regular field sports as well, but I just really see it being beneficial for these. So what is this movement I'm talking about? It is the reverse Nordic curl. Essentially what the Nordic curl looks like is somebody holds down your feet, and you've probably seen NFL players doing this and you're like, holy crap, that looks like a hamstring tear waiting to happen. It's actually the opposite. You hold down somebody's legs, they fall forward, and then some of these guys are even pulling themselves up again concentrically, which is insane, right? This exercise, studies have shown, can actually reduce the risk of injuries in the hamstring by up to 51%. It's also been shown that the Nordic curl can kind of help people with knee injuries and stabilizing the knee again, and a lot of physiotherapists I've seen have been implementing the Nordic curl into people's programs. Now, why aren't people using the reverse Nordic curl? It's essentially the same thing. It's building eccentric strength, right, through a really big range of motion with your body weight, but for your hip flexors and your quad, your rec fem. This could be huge for people who do jumping exercises. Now, before we get too lost into the movement, let's just kind of describe what the reverse Nordic curl looks like. What you're going to essentially do is you're going to be tall, kneeling, okay? So you're in a straight line, you're stacking your spine. I want you to squeeze your hips all the way through. If you're somebody with shortened hip flexors, or what we call lower cross syndrome, where you're going to essentially have tight hip flexors, tight lower back all the time. You're going to have really stretched out kind of stomach. You're going to have like this booty popping out, but it's like not a good booty. It's like a fake booty that you kind of created through cranking out your lower back. But essentially you're going to be tall, kneeling, hips forward, rib cage down, nice straight line, and then you're going to initiate the movement by leaning back slowly. This is the eccentric portion of the movement, where we are resisting the force being placed upon our quads and our hip flexors, using those muscles to kind of bring ourselves down nice and slowly, and then we're reversing that if we can, either with our body weight, or in this next clip here, you can see me using bands to just overload the eccentric position until I'm strong enough to eventually come up on my own. For now, I'm going to be using this band if I want to get that huge benefit of the range of motion in the eccentric. Right? Hip extension comes from the back side of the body. So you gotta be thinking about like your glutes, your hamstrings, your calves. This is called triple extension. A lot of coaches teach this in all sports, right? It's like the epitome of becoming a super athlete. If you like triple extension down, you are a gangster. You're gonna be getting all kinds of gold medals. You probably go to the Olympics, and you won't be sitting in a room with a weird thunderbolt talking to a camera. Okay, so let's talk about why I love this exercise so much. Number one, it is amazing for reducing lower back injuries. I said it. It is probably one of the most underrated lower back injury prevention exercises for people who play sports, and especially people who are doing things like jumping and weightlifting, anything off of two legs. Let's think about a jump for 1 second. We jump in the air, right? We're jumping, our hips are coming through, we're going into that triple extension that every coach talks about, right? Our glutes are flying through. And then what's getting lengthened on the front side? Your hip flexors, right? So your hip flexors would be your psoas, your iliacus, and your rectus femoris, which is actually the top of your quad. It's a quad muscle, right? But it kind of works differently than other quads. These muscles are being fully stretched open, right? Now, let's take this for example, right? We're playing baseball. Somebody throws a baseball, I'm the batter, right? There's a pitcher. The pitcher's a gangster, he throws really fast, hard balls, haha. Anyways, they throw this ball, I'm at bat, buddy's in the back, he's the catcher, and then behind the catcher, there's for some reason a house with a nice window. Ball gets thrown at me, right? I swing, I miss, I suck at baseball, right? I'm no good, right? But luckily, homeboy in the back catches it. So the ball goes right into his mitt, no harm, no foul, right? So all that energy is stopped by the mitt and the guy in the back. Let's say that guy wasn't there, right? The ball gets thrown, tons of force produced, I'm unable to, I miss it, something goes wrong, blah, 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 injury, right? That ball's gonna keep going until it hits something, right? So the force is gonna keep going until it crashes into that glass shatters, boom. Analogy for your back. Now, when you're jumping really high, if the muscles in the front aren't able to absorb that force and in an eccentric manner, remember, training has to be specific. So you can't just do leg raises to train your hip flexors, and you can't just do squats to train your quads and then think that you're going to be in perfectly fine shape. I mean, those muscles will still get developed with that, don't get me wrong, but if you're trying to get very specific, you want to try and recreate what's actually happening in that movement and train accordingly. So the muscles being really lengthened and we're trying to absorb all that force that's coming at us. That's exactly what the reverse Nordic curl does. We're leaning back in a stretched position and it's only getting into a deeper range of motion of hip extension, right? And it's closing off into more knee flexion, which is awesome for your quads. So you're absorbing all that force. That's what we're training for. This is the same reason why the Nordic curl works so great for sprinters. It's teaching us in that end phase swing, when your knee's opening up and you're getting ready to touch floor again with that foot, and that hamstring is stretching open and it's absorbed all this force. That's why these movements work so well. They're teaching us how to be strong eccentrically when we need them most. Number 2, it trains the quads in a full manner. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but they think just squatting is enough to build your quads. Overall, it's not. The quads do have a ton of activation and their cross-sectional area grows a bunch when you do the squat. Squat's an amazing movement. Every program, I think, should have some sort of a variation of a squat. I love squats. But they only train the single joint quadricep muscles, like for example, your VMO and your lateralis and your intermedius and all those. It's not training the rectus femoris, right? The rectus femoris, as is the hamstring, are biarticulate muscles. So aka they cross over 2 joints, right? So it crosses over at the hip, crosses over at the knee. Because of that, these muscles don't get as much activation in these types of movements when you're using the hip and the knee joint at the same time, right? That's why things like leg extensions work the whole quad, right? Or things like a hamstring curl is gonna really work your hamstrings. But doing just a squat isn't enough to train either or of those. So that's pretty funny. It's not funny actually, it just sucks because a lot of people like me have been doing squats forever and didn't know that the rec fem wasn't getting hammered enough. Unless you're doing other isolation movements. But anyways, so people will be like, okay, then why can't I just do leg extensions? Good point. You could. It's gonna, at least that would hit your rec fem as well, and you're gonna get a complete quad workout, right? However, it's still not hitting the hip flexors the same as the reverse Nordic curl would. Because when you're opening up and you're keeping your hips in extension, you're going to be using that hip flexor eccentrically, and then you're going to use it again concentrically if you're coming all the way back up. Whereas with the leg extension, your hips are in a fixed position for the most part, and it's pretty much just your knee that's going to be doing all the work, right? Your knee extension. That's the main thing that's going to happen. Number 3, eccentrics are great for increasing mobility and strength. Now, a lot of people may not know this, but mobility is essentially based off the nervous system. And if you think about it, it kind of makes a lot of sense, because if your body doesn't trust you with a range of motion, if it doesn't think your muscle is strong enough there or stable enough, it's not going to allow you to just go willy-nilly and injure yourself, right? It's going to put a little bit of a brake on it. How do we kind of persuade the nervous system to give us that extra range of motion? Stretching is one way. Stretching is basically low-level isometrics. You're maintaining a new position. It's a little bit tough, it's giving you a little bit of resistance, but you're basically maintaining the same muscle length over a period of time, right? That's what that does. In this study though, we found that eccentrics actually helped more in increasing the mobility in an acute type of sense, so basically in a short period of time, better than stretching, about 10% versus 5%. So there's about a doubling in that. That doesn't mean you don't need to stretch anymore. Stretching is great. But it's just cool that eccentrics were able to actually increase this mobility and give us the added benefit of building strength as well at the same time. So that's why I would recommend any type of movement that has this eccentric portion, especially through a great range of motion. This is also why, versus the leg extension, going back to my second point, why this movement's better. It takes you through a very, very long range of motion of knee flexion and then knee extension if you do it concentrically after. So it's fantastic. So in conclusion, that's why I think the reverse Nordic curl should be in everybody's program. Well, everybody who can handle it. Obviously, disclaimer, because I'm not a doctor. I'm not Coach Greg. I'm a doctor. So basically, if you're somebody who has issues kneeling or patella tendon issues or patella end issues, anything like that, I mean, you're probably going to want to avoid this exercise because you are kneeling. Same with even a regular Nordic curl. Also, if you're kind of early stages of a rehab program, most physios I've seen, they put it into a later stage. And obviously, you got to consult somebody who knows their stuff on that. But other than that, if you're a healthy individual and you're trying to protect yourself from injuries, especially in the lower back, I would highly, highly recommend loading this exercise. And if you can find a gym actually that has the quad hip developer by Westside, that's basically like the glute ham raise version of the reverse Nordic curl, right? So I think if you're inputting any exercises, either do glute ham raises, reverse Nordic curls, you can do regular Nordic curls, and then you can do the hip quad developer. And these are all amazing movements that you can kind of load, and they will help you become a better athlete today. And you know, leaning back is just super cool. You see people in the 90s, the show's always doing it. So start leaning back more. Peace.